I stood frozen in the hallway, my keys still dangling in my hand, as Linda's voice sliced through the quiet. "I can't stand being around him anymore," she said, her tone sharp and weary, like she'd been carrying that sentence for months. She didn't know I was home. I'd come back early from the hardware store, a bag of nails for the fence still in my grip. She was on the phone, pacing the kitchen, her back to me, and I didn't wait to hear the rest. Something snapped inside me, a brittle thread I didn't even know was there. I turned, walked upstairs, packed a duffel bag with a few shirts and my toothbrush, and left. No note, no goodbye, just the sound of the front door clicking shut behind me. I wanted to see what she'd do when I vanished from her life. What I didn't expect was how her reaction would turn everything I thought I knew upside down. It started weeks ago, though I couldn't pinpoint the exact day the ground shifted beneath us. Linda and I had been married for 8 years, living in a tidy split-level house in suburban Ohio, a life of quiet routines, grocery lists, and Netflix marathons. But lately, those routines felt like they belonged to someone else. She'd come home from her job at the insurance firm with her makeup freshly touched up, her lips glistening like she'd just reapplied gloss in the car. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd shrug, her eyes darting to her phone. "Fine," she'd say, then laugh at some text I couldn't see before flipping the screen face down on the counter. At first, I brushed it off. She was stressed, I told myself. Work had been hectic since her promotion last spring. But the excuses piled up, and I started to notice the cracks. There was the perfume, for one. She'd always worn the same scent, something citrusy and light that reminded me of our honeymoon in Florida. But one evening, as I leaned in to kiss her goodnight, I caught a whiff of something heavier, muskier, like sandalwood and secrets. "New perfume?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She froze for half a second, then smiled too brightly. "Oh, yeah, a sample from the mall. Do you like it?" I nodded, but the lie hung between us like cigarette smoke. She didn't go to the mall. She hated shopping unless it was for groceries or Christmas gifts. The next morning, I found the bottle in her purse when I was looking for her car keys, a sleek black vial she'd never mentioned again. Then there were the late nights. She'd started staying at the office longer, claiming her team was swamped with claims after a storm hit Cleveland. "You wouldn't believe the paperwork," she'd say, kicking off her heels and pouring herself a glass of wine. But her shoes were never muddy, and her blouse always looked crisp, like she'd spent the evening somewhere else entirely. I'd sit on the couch, pretending to watch the Browns game, while my mind spun. Was I imagining it? Was I the paranoid husband from some Lifetime movie? I'd always trusted her. Linda wasn't the type to lie. Or so I thought. The phone calls were the worst. She'd take them in the other room, her voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't decipher. Once, I crept closer to the bedroom door and heard her laugh, a soft, intimate sound I hadn't heard in months. "No, he's downstairs," she said, and my stomach twisted. Who was she talking to? Her sister? A friend? Or someone I didn't know? When she came back, I asked who it was, and she waved me off. "Just Kelly from work. Girl stuff." But Kelly didn't call at 9 p.m., and Linda's cheeks were flushed in a way that felt wrong. By the time I heard her say she couldn't stand me, I'd been drowning in doubt for weeks. I tried to bridge the gap, suggested a weekend in Chicago, cooked her favorite lasagna, even asked if she wanted to talk about us. She'd brush me off every time, her smile tight, her eyes somewhere else. So when I walked out that afternoon, it wasn't just anger driving me. It was a need to know. I checked into a motel off I-71, a dingy place with stained carpets and a flickering neon sign, and waited. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I just watched my phone, expecting it to light up with her name. It didn't. For 2 days, nothing. And then, on the third night, it buzzed, not with a call, but with a single message. "Where are you?" I stared at it, my heart pounding, wondering what game we were playing now. Sitting in that motel room, the hum of the highway buzzing through the thin walls, I couldn't stop replaying the last few months in my head. Linda's message, "Where are you?" sat unanswered on my phone, glowing like a taunt. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to drive back home, barge through the door, and demand answers. But another part, the quieter, darker one, told me to wait, to watch her unravel without me there to hold the pieces together. I'd been blind for too long, ignoring the signs that something was rotting beneath the surface of our life. Now, with nothing but a lumpy mattress and a muted TV for company, I started piecing it together, and the picture wasn't pretty. It wasn't just the late nights or the perfume that gnawed at me. It was the way she'd changed. Small shifts I'd brushed off as quirks until they started piling up like unpaid bills. Take her clothes, for instance. Linda had always been practical, jeans and sweaters for weekends, sensible blouses for work. But a few months back, I'd noticed new things in her closet. A silky red dress with a plunging neckline, heels so high they looked painful, a leather jacket I'd never seen her wear. "What's with the wardrobe upgrade?" I'd asked one morning, trying to sound playful. She'd laughed it off, tossing her hair in a way that felt rehearsed. "Just felt like a change," she said, but she didn't meet my eyes. Later, I found the tags in the trash, hundreds of dollars spent at some boutique in Columbus, a place we'd never gone together. Her excuses got flimsier too. She'd always been a planner, texting me if she'd be home late or if she was grabbing coffee with a coworker. But lately, she'd breeze in without warning, her purse clutched tight, her answers vague. "Where were you?" I'd ask, keeping my tone light. "Oh, just running errands," she'd say, or had to finish something at the office. Once, I caught her slipping her phone into her pocket as she walked in, her fingers quick, like she didn't want me to see the screen. I'd asked who she was texting, and she'd snapped, "Nobody, Matt, God, just give me some space." It was the first time she'd raised her voice in years, and it stung more than I'd expected. The distance wasn't just physical, it was in the air between us, thick and suffocating. We used to talk about everything, stupid work gossip, plans for a summer trip, even the stray cat that kept sneaking into our garage. But now, dinner was silent unless I forced a conversation, and even then, her replies were clipped. "How's the project going?" I'd ask, nodding at the laptop she'd started bringing home. "Fine," she'd mutter, her fingers tapping the keys like she couldn't wait to escape. One night, I glanced over her shoulder and saw a chat window pop up, just a glimpse before she minimized it. The name was Jay, and the message said, "Can't wait." She'd slammed the lid shut, claiming it was a work thing, but her hands were trembling. I started doubting myself, wondering if I was the problem. Maybe I'd gotten too comfortable, let the lawn grow too long, stopped shaving on weekends, asked too many questions. Linda had always said she loved my steadiness, my predictability, but what if that bored her now? I'd catch her staring out the kitchen window, her face blank, and I'd wonder what she was thinking. Once, I tried to pull her back, wrap my arms around her from behind while she washed dishes. She stiffened, then patted my hand like I was a kid she was humoring. "Not now, Matt," she'd said, and slipped away to take a call. I stood there, the sink still running, feeling like a ghost in my own house. By the time I'd walked out, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something bigger than a bad mood. The motel's neon light flickered through the curtains, casting shadows that danced like accusations. I thought about the man she might be texting, the one behind the J on her screen. Was he someone from work? A stranger? Someone who made her laugh the way I used to? I poured a shot of cheap whiskey from the bottle I'd bought at a gas station and stared at her message again. "Where are you?" she'd asked. But what I really wanted to know was, where had she been? Not just tonight, but for months, slipping away from me, one lie at a time. I didn't reply. Instead, I grabbed my keys. If she wouldn't come clean, I'd find the truth myself. The motel parking lot was a graveyard of rusting cars and flickering streetlights when I climbed into my truck, the engine growling to life. I didn't have a plan, just a burning need to see what Linda was doing now that I wasn't there to watch her every move. Her text still sat unanswered, and I wasn't ready to give her the satisfaction of a reply. Instead, I drove back toward our neighborhood, the 20-minute stretch of highway blurring past as my mind churned. I wasn't going home, not yet. I'd park a block away, keep the lights off, and see what she did when she thought I was gone for good. If she was hiding something, I'd catch her in it. I pulled into a spot under a sagging oak tree, just out of sight of our house. The street was quiet, the kind of suburban stillness that made every sound feel like a confession. Our living room light was on, a warm glow spilling through the curtains, and I could see her silhouette moving inside. She was pacing, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing wildly. I couldn't hear the words, but her body screamed frustration, shoulders hunched, head shaking. Was she worried about me? Or pissed that I'd left without a fight? I waited, my breath fogging the windshield, until she hung up and grabbed her coat. 10 minutes later, her car peeled out of the driveway, headlights cutting through the dark. I followed her, keeping 2 cars between us like some amateur detective. She didn't head toward the office or her sister's place in Dayton. She drove downtown, weaving through Columbus traffic until she pulled into a parking lot near a trendy little cafe called Brew and Vine. I'd never been there. Linda always said she hated pretentious coffee shops. I parked across the street, slumping low in the seat, and watched her step out. She'd changed. Jeans and a sweater swapped for that red dress I'd seen in her closet, her hair loose instead of pinned up. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before ducking inside. Through the cafe's wide windows, I saw her slide into a booth across from a guy. Tall, dark hair, maybe 40, wearing a blazer that screamed money. He leaned in, smiling, and she mirrored him, her laugh faint but unmistakable through the glass. My chest tightened. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was damn close. They didn't touch, didn't kiss, just talked over steaming mugs, but the way she tilted her head, the way her fingers brushed her hair, told me more than a lip lock ever could. This wasn't a work meeting. This was something else. I sat there for an hour, my hands clenched on the steering wheel, until they finally left, separately, her first, him a few minutes later. I tailed her home, my pulse hammering, and watched her slip back into the house like nothing had happened. The next day, I couldn't resist digging deeper. I drove home while she was at work, let myself in, and started searching. In the kitchen trash, buried under coffee grounds, I found a receipt, Brew and Vine, 2 lattes, a date from last week when she'd said she was working late. $50, paid in cash. We never went to places like that together. She'd always teased me about my diner coffee obsession. Her laptop was next. She'd left it on the counter, logged out, but I knew her password, our anniversary, 0815. I hesitated, guilt prickling my skin, but I typed it anyway. Her email was a mess of work stuff, nothing obvious, until I checked the trash folder. There it was, a deleted message from J. Carter, subject line blank, sent 3 days ago. Thursday, 7, same spot. It read, followed by, missed you last time. I stared at it, my throat dry. J. Carter. The J from her screen that night. I Googled the name, too common, dozens of hits, but one linked to a LinkedIn profile. James Carter, some finance guy at a firm downtown. Dark hair, sharp jaw. It could be him. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. Doubt and rage wrestled inside me. Was she cheating? Or was I spinning a story out of scraps? I wanted to confront her, shove the receipt in her face, but I didn't. Not yet. I needed more, something solid to break through her lies. Back at the motel, I poured another whiskey and stared at the ceiling, her laugh from that cafe echoing in my head. She hadn't called again, hadn't texted. Maybe she didn't care I was gone. Or maybe she was too busy with him to notice. Either way, I wasn't letting it go. I'd find out who J. Carter was, and what he meant to my wife. The motel room smelled like stale smoke and regret, a fitting backdrop for the mess I'd become. I'd spent the night hunched over my phone. James Carter's LinkedIn photo burned into my brain, his smug grin, his polished bio about driving financial success. Was that who she was laughing with at Brew and Vine? I didn't sleep, just tossed back whiskey until the bottle ran dry, replaying every moment I'd missed the signs. Linda's red dress, her evasions, that damn receipt. They were pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. But I couldn't stop now. I'd walked out to test her, to see if she'd fight for me, and all I'd gotten was silence and a single, vague text. It wasn't enough. I tried to fix things before it came to this. A month ago, I'd booked a cabin in Hocking Hills, thinking a weekend away might pull us out of this rut. Let's go hiking, like we used to, I'd said, holding out the confirmation email like a peace offering. She'd barely glanced at it. I've got deadlines, Matt, she'd muttered, her eyes glued to her phone. I'd let it drop, but the rejection stung. Then there was the lasagna, her favorite, baked from scratch on a Tuesday night. I'd lit candles, poured wine, hoping for a spark. She'd picked at it, said she wasn't hungry, and excused herself to catch up on emails. The candles burned out alone, wax pooling on the table like my wasted effort. Her coldness wasn't new, but it had gotten worse. I'd catch her staring at me sometimes, her face unreadable, like she was measuring the distance between us. Once, I'd asked point blank, "Are you happy, Linda?" She'd flinched, then forced a smile. "Of course I am," she'd said, too fast, before changing the subject to some work drama I didn't care about. I'd wanted to push, to ask what I was doing wrong, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I'd retreated, watched her drift further, her orbit shifting somewhere I couldn't follow. Back at the motel, I couldn't sit still. I drove to a bar downtown, a dive called Rusty's where the jukebox played Springsteen and the beer was cheap. I drank until the edges blurred, trying to drown the image of her with him. A woman at the bar, blonde, mid-30s, smiled at me, and for a second, I thought about talking to her, just to feel something else. But I didn't. I stumbled back to the motel, the buzz souring into a headache, and scrolled through old photos on my phone. Us at the Grand Canyon, her hair windblown, my arm around her. When had that Linda disappeared? The next morning, hungover and hollow, I went back to the house. She was at work, and I let myself in, the silence louder than ever. I rifled through her dresser, her desk, anything for more proof. In her nightstand, I found a folded post-it, a phone number, no name, written in her neat script. I called it from a gas station payphone, my heart pounding. A man answered, voice smooth and unfamiliar. "Hey you," he said, like he'd been expecting her. I hung up, my stomach lurching. It wasn't James Carter's voice. I'd found a video of him speaking at some conference, but it was someone. Another secret. I couldn't take it anymore. I'd tried bridging the gap, and she'd built a wall. I'd watched her with that guy, found the receipt, the email, now this number. Each clue was a knife twist, but none was the smoking gun I needed. I paced the house, my anger boiling over. I wanted to smash something, her laptop, the wine glasses we'd bought together, but I didn't. Instead, I grabbed a pen and wrote a note. I know you're hiding something. I'm done waiting. I left it on the kitchen counter, locked the door behind me, and drove back to the motel. It was a bluff, a last shot to shake her into the truth. That night, my phone lit up, not a text, but a call. Linda's name flashed, and I let it ring, my pulse racing. When it stopped, she called again. Then a text, "Come home. Please." I stared at it, torn between fury and a stupid, stubborn hope. Was she scared I'd figured it out? Or was she finally ready to talk? I didn't know, but I couldn't keep running. Tomorrow, I'd go back, not to forgive, but to face whatever she'd say. I had no idea how wrong I'd been about everything. The next morning, I drove back to the house, the note I'd left burning a hole in my mind. Linda's plea, "Come home, please," looped through my head, a mix of desperation and bait I couldn't ignore. I didn't know what I'd find when I walked in, but I was done with shadows and guesses. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I pulled into the driveway, her car parked crooked like she'd rushed home. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. I stepped inside, the door creaking, and there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, my note crumpled in her fist, her eyes red and swollen. For a moment, I almost believed she'd missed me. "Matt," she said, her voice breaking as she stood. She crossed the room in 3 steps and threw her arms around me, sobbing into my chest. "I thought you were gone for good. I can't do this without you." Her words hit me like a punch, soft and raw, and for a heartbeat, I softened. She smelled like her old citrus perfume, not the musk I'd come to hate, and her grip was tight, like she was afraid I'd vanish again. I pulled back, searching her face. "Then why?" I asked, my voice rough. "Why'd you say you couldn't stand me? Who's Jay Carter? What the hell's going on, Linda?" She flinched, her tears stopping cold, and that's when I knew I'd struck something. She sank into a chair, hands trembling as she smoothed the note flat. "I didn't mean it," she whispered. "I was upset, venting to Kelly. It's not what you think." I snorted, crossing my arms. "Not what I think. I saw you with him, at that cafe. The receipt, the emails, the number in your nightstand. Don't lie to me anymore." Her eyes widened, panic flashing, but then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed, a shaky, bitter sound. "You think I'm cheating," she said, shaking her head. "God, Matt, if only it were that simple." I froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" She stood, grabbed her purse from the counter, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She shoved it at me, her jaw tight. "Read it." I unfolded it, a handwritten note, black ink, blocky letters. "Meet me tomorrow, 7, Brew and Vine." You know what happens if you don't. No signature, but the weight of it hit me like a brick. "What is this?" I demanded. She swallowed hard, her voice dropping. "His name's James Carter. We worked together years ago, before you and I met. I'm I made a mistake back then, Matt. A big one. He's been holding it over me for months. I stared at her, my mind racing. What mistake? She looked away, tears spilling again. I fudged some numbers, cooked the books at my old firm to cover a shortfall. James helped, but he kept proof. When I got promoted last spring, he showed up again, said he'd tell everyone, ruin me, unless I paid him. Or met him. I didn't know what to do. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair. Not an affair, a blackmail scheme. The late nights, the dress, the secrecy. It wasn't love, it was fear. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice hoarse. I couldn't, she said, hugging herself. I was ashamed. I thought I could handle it, keep him quiet. But he kept pushing, more money, more meetings. I hated it, hated him, and it was killing me to lie to you. That night on the phone, I was telling Kelly I couldn't stand this. Us. Because I was breaking under it all. Not you, Matt. Never you. Her words hung there, heavy and jagged. I wanted to believe her, but the lies still stung. So you met him anyway, I said. I saw you laughing. She nodded, miserable. I had to keep him calm. He'd get mad if I didn't play along. The room spun. I'd built this whole story, her betrayal, her lover, only to find a different kind of deceit. She wasn't cheating. She was trapped. But the relief clashed with anger. She'd shut me out, let me think the worst, and now what? How much does he have on you? I asked. She hesitated, then said, enough to send me to jail. Old emails, documents. He's got it all. I ran a hand through my hair, torn between pity and rage. She'd lied to protect herself, but she'd left me in the dark to drown. And yet, here she was, begging me to stay. I didn't know what to feel, only that this wasn't over. The kitchen felt like a battlefield, the air thick with Linda's confession and my churning thoughts. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tight, that crumpled note between us like a grenade with the pin pulled. Blackmail. Not an affair, but a secret she'd buried so deep it had festered into this. Months of lies, of me chasing ghosts while she fought a war I didn't even know about. I wanted to scream, to shake her for keeping me out, but her tears held me back. How much does he want? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She bit her lip, eyes darting away. 10 grand so far. But it's never enough. He keeps coming back. I leaned back, rubbing my face. $10,000. Our savings, her bonuses, gone to some sleaze from her past. And you didn't think to tell me? I said, sharper than I meant. She flinched. I wanted to, Matt. Every day. But I was scared. Scared you'd hate me, leave me. I thought I could fix it. Her voice cracked, and I saw the girl I'd married. The one who'd cried when her cat died. Not this stranger in a red dress. Fix it. I snapped. You let him bleed you dry while I sat here thinking you didn't love me anymore. You should have trusted me, Linda. She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see me like this. Weak, stupid. I messed up back then, and now it's ruining us. Her words cut deep, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. We drifted so far apart that she'd rather face this alone than lean on me. I stood, pacing the linoleum, my anger tangling with something softer. Pity, maybe, or the ghost of what we'd had. Show me everything, I said finally. The emails, the proof. All of it. She hesitated, then pulled her laptop from her bag. She logged in, her fingers shaky, and opened a folder buried in her files. Screenshots of old emails, a scanned ledger with red ink circling her mistakes. He's got copies, she said. He sent me this one last month, said he'd mail it to my boss if I didn't meet him. I scanned it, damning stuff, enough to tank her career and land her in court. James Carter wasn't just a leech, he was a predator. We're ending this, I said, slamming the laptop shut. Now. We argued. Loud, messy, the kind of fight that strips everything bare. What are you going to do, Matt? She yelled, her voice raw. Beat him up? He'll destroy me. I shouted back. And letting him run your life isn't destroying you? Us. I'm not losing you to this creep. She froze, her breath hitching, and for a second, we just stared at each other, two people who'd forgotten how to talk. Then she broke, collapsing into a chair. I don't know how to stop him, she whispered. He's got me cornered. I knelt in front of her, my hands on hers. You're not alone anymore, I said, softer now. We'll figure it out together. She looked at me, eyes searching, and nodded, just a flicker of the trust we'd lost. I grabbed my phone and dialed a guy I knew from work, Tony, who'd done some PI stuff on the side. I need a favor, I told him. Fast. He agreed to dig into Carter, background, dirt, anything we could use. Linda watched me, fragile but clinging to hope. That night, we laid it all out. She admitted the meetings weren't just payments. Carter had pushed for more, flirting, hinting, testing her. I played along to keep him off, she said, ashamed. That's why I laughed at the cafe. I hated every second. I believed her mostly, but the hurt lingered, a bruise I couldn't ignore. You should have told me, I said again, quieter. I could have helped. She squeezed my hand. I know that now. Tony called the next day. Carter had a history. Extortion, a sealed case from years back. He's slippery, Tony warned, but not untouchable. We set a trap. Linda would meet him, wired up, while Tony recorded it. I hated the idea, hated her near him, but it was our shot. She agreed, her jaw set. I want this over, she said. We planned it for tomorrow, Brew and Vine, 7 p.m. I'd be close, watching, ready to end this nightmare. But as she slept beside me that night, her breathing uneven, I wondered if we could stitch ourselves back together after all the lies, or if this would just be the final tear. The air outside Brew and Vine was crisp, the kind of Ohio evening that bites at your knuckles. I sat in Tony's beat-up sedan across the street, my eyes locked on the cafe's glowing windows. Linda was inside, wired with a mic Tony had rigged, a tiny thing taped under her sweater, feeding every word to a recorder in his bag. She'd walked in at 7 p.m. sharp, her red dress swapped for jeans and a jacket, her face pale but set. I hated this, her sitting across from that snake, pretending to play his game, but it was our only way out. Tony adjusted his earpiece beside me, nodding. She's doing good, Matt. Keep cool. Through the glass, I saw James Carter lean in, his smile oily, his hands steepled like he owned her. Linda's voice crackled through Tony's setup. I brought the money, she said, sliding an envelope across the table. Fake bills, courtesy of Tony's connections. Carter's grin widened. Smart girl. But you know this isn't the last time. She paused, then pushed. What if it was? What if I told someone, my husband, the cops? His laugh was low, smug. Go ahead. I've got those files on a timer. Email to your boss, the SEC, whoever. You're mine, Linda, unless you keep paying. My fists clenched. Tony muttered, got him. That's enough. Linda stood, her chair scraping. I'm done, she said, loud enough for the mic. Carter's face darkened, but before he could move, Tony signaled two guys, off-duty cops he'd roped in. They strolled into the cafe, badges flashing, and I watched Carter's smirk melt as they cuffed him. Linda slipped out, her shoulders shaking as she crossed to us. I pulled her into my arms, her breath hot against my neck. It's over, she whispered. I nodded, but it didn't feel like victory, not yet. The recorder was gold, Carter's threats, his admission of blackmail, all on tape. Tony handed it to the cops, who dug deeper and found his digital stash, files on Linda, two other victims, a whole operation. He'd been at this for years, a parasite in a blazer. The next week, we met with a lawyer. Linda's old fraud wasn't clean, but with Carter's leverage gone, she cut a deal. Probation, a fine, no jail. She'd lose her job, but she'd stay free. I deserve worse, she said one night, staring at the ceiling. I didn't argue. She'd broken the law, broken us, but I couldn't hate her, not fully. We tried to rebuild. The house felt different, quieter, heavier. I'd catch her staring at me over coffee, her eyes asking questions we didn't voice. I'd touch her hand, and she'd smile, but it was thin, fragile. We talked more, about her shame, my anger, the silence that had let this fester. I should have told you, she said once, her voice small. Yeah, I replied, and I should have seen you were drowning. We'd both failed, in our own ways. A month later, I made a choice. I packed my truck, not to leave her, but to end this chapter. I'm going, I told her, my duffel slung over my shoulder. Her face crumpled, but I held up a hand. Not forever. I helped you stop him, Linda, but I need time. We need space to figure out what's left. She nodded, tears spilling, and didn't fight me. I drove to my brother's place in Toledo, the highway stretching out like a question mark. She'd begged me to stay once, and I had. For her. For us. Now, I left for me. Her reaction shocked me, even then. She didn't call, didn't chase me down. A week later, a letter came. Her handwriting, shaky but clear. I love you, Matt. I messed up, but I'll wait. Take what you need. I folded it, my throat tight, and stared out at the snow-dusted street. We'd lost so much to secrets, little lies that grew into monsters because we'd stopped talking. I didn't know if I'd go back, if we could mend what broke. But as I sat there, I saw it clear. Trust wasn't just love. It was the words we didn't say, the closeness we let slip. And without it, we'd vanished from each other long before I walked out that door.